If you enjoy what we're doing and want to become one of our tribe, then go ahead and click subscribe. And if you choose to be PC with D, remember, it's always free. And if you give that little bell icon a ring, you'll be notified of our next video, and you won't miss a thing. And if you choose to give this video a like, won't you please share it as well, so we can give Christianity a bigger mic. Good morning, everybody. It's certainly good to see a nice little audience with us this morning. Certainly glad to have Rick and Frida, as Dad said, with us. And hopefully they have a safe journey back home when they head back that way. We've had a kind of a hot, dry spell and a little bit of rain here and there, as they say. I think we're entering the dog days of summer. Some folks say it can't get hot enough for me. Well, it's hot enough for me. So glad to see each and every one of you. And you know, the things that I've prepared, as I always say, are always meant to help you and never to hurt you. And every lesson I prepare is given to me first. Our lesson today is simply titled, as Dad said on the board, God Guides Us Through. Now, this lesson came out of seeing some things online. I do a lot of online ministries and different things. And I've seen a lot of different talks from Christians especially that are having trouble with things in their life and things that have befallen them, and they were discouraged, and talked a little bit with them. I also had a moment this week where I had a very lengthy conversation with someone wanting to know the fundamentals of the Church of Christ. Why we do what we do, why we practice the way that we do. And it was a very productive conversation. Got to see our side of things, I think she did. And I was very glad to have that conversation. But this kept popping up, the discouragement, the different things that befall folks. And even amongst Christians, the question obligatory always comes up, doesn't it? If God is so good, why does He allow bad things to happen? Is that not the probably quintessential question that any Christian is asked in this life? It's kind of the trump card, isn't it? For someone maybe that doesn't go to church, or maybe someone who's discouraged, their go-to is, if God's so good, why has He let this happen to me? And that's an interesting question, isn't it? It's a question that was thrown our way. It's rough to answer because you don't want to offend somebody. You don't want to drive them away. And you certainly do not want to seem uncaring by simply sweeping it away. So it got me thinking about the idea for this lesson, about how God guides us through. And I got to thinking about an analogy. Think about this in terms of being a parent, or anyone, an aunt, an uncle, someone that's had a younger person under you. And I got to thinking about the idea of riding a bike. Now think about that when you're a parent and you're teaching your child how to ride a bike, and they're trying and they're trying. There's many times during those times where they're going to crash that bike, aren't they? They're going to fall off, they're going to wobble, fall over, hit something, fall off many, many times. And when you, as the parent, go over to that child who's crashed that bike, they're all discouraged, aren't they? They're crying, they're hurt, their pride is offended. They want to get this down like all the other kids. And they're so broken up and hurt by it. But why are you, as the parent, not broken up by it? Why? Because eventually you know they're going to get it, right? You know eventually they're going to catch on to it. And they're going to be out there riding with all the other kids. Well, folks, that's God with you and me. You see, a lot of times in our life we have tough times. Just because you have the name of Christian that you carry with you, does it mean you're going to have an easy time all the time? Does it mean that life isn't going to throw its tough things your way? No. But God sees past that moment and sees where you're going to be. The reason God isn't discouraged when we fail, when we mess up sometimes, because as a Christian, He knows our heart, and He knows that eventually we're going to make things right. We unfortunately can't see that sometimes, and There's no harder person on themselves when we sin and mess up in this life than a Christian, is there? We are the toughest people there is upon ourselves when we fall short of the glory of God. It dominates your thoughts, doesn't it? You go to bed thinking about it, you pray about it, and even after you pray about it, you still can't let it go. You hold on to those times, those failures, those discouragements. But God knows your heart. He knows when you repent, and He knows that you're going to make things right. God will guide us through. Today we're going to look at a couple of examples that I could not think are more fitting of this principle about God guiding us through. And I believe this is one of Jason's favorite stories. Our first one here, number one, in our first point today, I have written here that God doesn't always necessarily take us out of the fire, but He guides us through the furnace. You ever heard that old expression, out of the fire and into the furnace? Meaning things are going to get rougher, right? You've gone out of one tough situation and you're just going to be shoved into something even more tough. I have written here, not out of the fire, but through the furnace. If you want to follow along, our first story that we're going to go over is in Daniel chapter 3. And it's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Very, very interesting story here. And Daniel is one of my absolute favorite books that is full of positive inspiration for us in our Christian life. But in this story, we find out that the children of Judah at this time are under occupancy and they're captives to Babylon. And at this time, it's under King Nebuchadnezzar. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were three friends of Daniel. And they were very, very righteous men that held to their principles, even though they were, at the time, in a pagan world in Babylon, taken out of everything they knew, taught to know the pagan ways, and taught to respect those ways, and to not only respect them, but kind of take them on in their life. We're going to find out that the faith of these three men was greater than Nebuchadnezzar could have ever anticipated. So at this time, he built a great statue unto himself, 60 cubits high, gigantic statue made of gold. And they made a decree that whenever these music played of all these different instruments, when the music played, you were supposed to bow down and worship unto this statue. And of course, some of the men of Nebuchadnezzar found out that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do this. The Chaldeans. And so they go and they report back to Nebuchadnezzar, hey, those three men that are those three captives of Judah that are under you, they're refusing when this music is played to bow down and worship to this statue of you, O king. And now he's mad. He sees this as a slap in the face. He sees this as an insult to his authority. And so he calls them in, doesn't he? He says, haven't you heard? There's a decree out that if you hear this music, you're supposed to bow down and worship unto this statue, lest you be thrown into a burning, fiery furnace. Do you not know this? And if you do and you're ready, be prepared to do this. So what is their answer? And these are some of the most interesting verses in this whole chapter, verses 15 to 18. The answer, he's first of all in verse 15 says, you know this is going to happen, so are you going to do it or not? Verse 15, he says, what God will relieve you from my hands? Well, he's pretty confident, isn't he? Nebuchadnezzar says, what God is going to protect you from me? If you don't do this, you're going to lose your life. But in verse 16, they say, we are not careful to answer you, O king, but our God can deliver us. Could you imagine that? Standing in the presence of a guy that can take your life, and all you need to do is simply get down on your knee and bow down to a statue to preserve your life. But because you know it is ungodly to worship idols, because you know this is something that will anger God, you are willing to give your own life in service to what is right before God. Now after hearing this, Nebuchadnezzar is furious. And he tells his men, the strongest men he has in his army, to bound these 3 men and to throw them into that fiery furnace. Heat that furnace 7 times hotter than it needed to be to kill an average man. So he's making sure, isn't he? He's taking every precaution to make sure that these 3 men are dead for their defiance. How dare they stand up to me, and I'm going to show them. I'm the one with power. I'm the one that holds the gavel in this place. He was going to learn quite differently, didn't he? So those men that bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they go to take them in, and the fire is so hot it consumes them. It kills the very men that were going to throw them in the process. But they fall in anyway, don't they? All 3 fall down into the furnace, bound, completely clothed, hats, coats, hosen, the heel, fall into the furnace. But as they're in there, nothing happens, does it? By verse 23 of Daniel 3 through 25, the king looks and he says, did we not throw 3 men into that fiery furnace? His men that are still there answer back by saying, yes, O king. He says, well, I see 4. And the 4th looks like that of the Son of God. And so Nebuchadnezzar goes to the mouth of the furnace, doesn't he? He calls for him to come out. Because when he looked down in, all 3 men are walking around flames, and not a single thing is harmed upon them. Not even so much as a stitch of their clothing has any signs of burning. Could you imagine seeing that sight as the king? As the old expression goes, that would put the fear of God into you, would it not? To look in and see 3 men walking through flames with no hurt. That changed his tune pretty quick, and he told him to come forth. Come out of that fiery furnace. And so they do. And as they come out, nothing's harmed on them. Not even the smell of smoke, we're told, is upon them. Could you imagine that? Changed his tune. And by verse 29 of Daniel 3, that king Nebuchadnezzar says, this is the God. Your God is the one that's able to deliver you. And praise be to him. What an awesome story. But how many things do we take from this in our life today as a Christian? When we read this, what does this hold for me in 2023? What it shows us is God guides us through. Did God take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the furnace? He didn't, did he? God didn't take them out of the furnace. He guided them through. Is that not what he does for me and you? Is there not times in our life where we're going to have to go through the fire? Peter tells us about this, doesn't he? In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 7, he says there that the trial of our faith is more precious than gold, though it be tried with fire, that it might be found to praise, honor, and glory at the coming of Jesus Christ. There's going to be trials in our life, isn't there? And it's precious. What do you mean it's precious? You mean when I'm discouraged, when I'm beat to my knees, when this life is getting the best of me? That's good? That's precious? It is. Because you know why? When you go through those times, your faith is put to use. Just like a muscle that you use in this life, the more you use it, the more you build it, the stronger it gets. Same thing with our faith. When our faith is forced to be put to the test, forced to be used, forced to guide you through those tough times, then is it not strengthened? Because when you come out on the other side of that, you're a different person, aren't you? And the next time something similar like that happens to you in your life, you know that God's helped you before, and He's going to do the same again. Yes, God could have easily snapped His fingers, couldn't He? And made sure that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego never fell into that furnace. That nothing ever happened to them. But He made sure that they went in there, didn't He? To show them and show all those around the power of God and to show what He can do. He can guide you through. Yes, God doesn't always pull us out of the furnace. Doesn't always pull us out of the fire. But He guides us through. And He did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then not only changed their life, not only strengthened their faith, I'm sure, but it sure changed the outlook and life of Nebuchadnezzar, didn't it? They won him over. And by 29, the 29th verse, he's praising God. The very God he was kind of denouncing and shoving off to the side, wasn't he? In verse 15. Boy, he changed his tune pretty quick. What God is going to save you from my hands? To, wow, may your God be praised. He's the one that delivered you. That's what God can do. Not only for our lives in the tough times when He guides us through, but for the lives of those around us. Because, folks, we are an example. When people see you going through a tough patch in your life, and you handle it with grace, you handle it like a Christian, that makes an impression on people. That changes their outlook because they're expecting you to be the bitter, angry person that blames God for everything that goes wrong in your life. And when you don't, and you handle it with grace and you do those things knowing that God is going to guide you through, it makes a difference. Yes, we're also told about how important it is to go through the flames, not only in Peter, but James tells us in James chapter 1, verses 3 and 4 as well. He talks there about the importance of this going through these trials, this patience that we're going to have to endure and take on in our Christian life. He tells us there that we're going to have to endure many, many things, but this is going to be a perfect work in us. Know ye not that the trial of your faith worketh patience. Here's the best part. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be entire and wanting nothing. James 1, 3 and 4. That pretty well sums it up, doesn't it? The trial of our faith. What's he saying? Let this may be known unto you as a Christian. You will be tried. You will have times where your patience is going to be pushed to the absolute limit. But in these times, let your faith have its perfect work. Let it do its job. Let your belief that you think that there is a God, you know there is a God and a Jesus Christ in heaven and a heavenly home, waiting for those who go through those trials, as James 1 and 12 tells us, that blessed is the one that endures the temptation. For when they are tried, they will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those that love Him. We know this. In those times, let that patience have its perfect work, so that you will be entire, or in other words, complete, and wanting nothing. Is that not the ultimate day in your Christian life? Is that not the day that every one of us live, breathe, and work towards as a Christian? To get to the day where we are complete as a Christian. Where no matter what happens to us in our life, we have that absolute faith, 1%, that it will work out one way or another because God will make it so. That's faith. When we reach that point, we've reached the zenith of our faith. We all live and work towards, because so many times we doubt, don't we? We fall short. When we go through those flames, we shake our head and say, why me? I'm a Christian. Shouldn't it be easier for me? Why does this befall me? There's a reason, folks. God sometimes doesn't pull us out of the fire, but He guides us through the furnace. Just as He did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But it doesn't just stop there. We move on to my second point. Number 2 I have written here about God guides us through. Sometimes He doesn't immediately open the door of the den, but He will protect us until then. Still sticking in Daniel. Going to Daniel chapter 6 now. So now not only did Daniel have to win over, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego win over Nebuchadnezzar, and he believed in the God. Now, unfortunately, we move to a different occupancy. Now God's people are under the rule of Persia, and we're under King Darius, which I actually read. King Darius was actually sitting in as a steward for Cyrus. So he was kind of the king, but he was the acting king at the time. He wasn't necessarily the real king. But Darius was a person that once again had to be won over by Daniel and his faith, and he was. Sometimes, once again, we are going to go through tough times where the door of our life is shut. We don't see a way out. Stuff befalls us. Stuff happens to us. We don't see how is this going to work out. How am I going to get through to the other side? Why does God not open the door? Why doesn't He help me? Well, we're going to see how He helps more than we ever realized. Daniel chapter 6. Now we have kind of a political coup going on as we start this chapter. Here we find that Daniel, which in Hebrew Daniel means God is my judge. Pretty apropos. But God is my judge, or Daniel now, is one of 3 princes that was favored by King Darius to be over all the kingdom. And these other princes did not like Daniel. He's too goody-goody. We don't like this guy. He doesn't fit in with us, and he's not going along with the things we want to do. And so they devise a plan to get rid of him. He says, we're not going to find an occasion against this Daniel in his life. He's too clean. He's too good. We're not going to find anything wrong with him that Darius is going to do anything to him. But where we can get him is against his God. That's where we've got him. So they come up with this plan, and they make a decree that for 30 days, no one should worship anyone, no God, no one else, except for the king Darius. And they bring this decree before him. He said, we all got together, O king. All the princes, the governors, all these guys, we've got together. We've made this decree that says that for 30 days, no one should worship anyone but you. Boy, the king likes that. Even being kind of maybe a decent man at heart, his ego got the best of him, didn't it? Well, that sounds pretty good. 30 days, nobody's going to worship anybody but me? I like the sound of that. He starts signing off on the dotted line, not realizing he's just condemned one of his favorite servants. So after Daniel knows that this is signed, does he stop? It's only 30 days, folks. Knowing that if you worship any other god, any other person but the king for 30 days, you could be tossed into a lion's den. Boy, for 30 days, I venture to say that even most Christians would kind of bury their head and hide for 30 days, wouldn't you? Daniel didn't. Not only did he not renounce his God, but he prayed with the windows open. The windows open. He ceased not to give supplications and pray unto God for those 30 days. And of course he was caught, wasn't he? They found him praying. They take him in. "O king, we found this Daniel. Didn't you write a decree that says?" King actually remembered the decree. He said, yeah. Well, this Daniel here was worshiping his God. And after he realized what he had done, he tried to change it. He tried to get out of it. "Oh, no, king. The decree that you signed, it's binding by the law of the Medes and the Persians. You can't get out of this, king. This is going to stand for these 30 days. And this Daniel right here was worshiping his God outside of you. He's guilty." The king, knowing what he had done, was very, very sorrowful. And he had to throw Daniel into the lion's den, didn't he? But he lost sleep that night, wouldn't you? Condemning an innocent man, a good man. Couldn't sleep, couldn't get anything, and in the wee hours of the morning he went out. And in verse 20 of Daniel 6, the king cries out, "O Daniel, has your God delivered you from the lions?" And in verse 22, this is the one that always brings a smile to my face. Daniel 6 and 22, Daniel says, "O king, yes, the Lord has sent his angels, and they have shut the mouth of the lions, and there is no hurt upon me." because I was innocent before my God and I was innocent before thee. You imagine being thrown in a den of lions. Once again, here we see people would say, well, Daniel was as good of a Christian as there was, as good of a godly man as there was. What did he do to deserve being thrown into a lion's den? The hatred and wickedness of men led him there. What did he do to deserve it? Did God immediately pull Daniel out of the lion's den? He didn't, did he? But he guided him through, didn't he? He didn't immediately open the door of the den, but he made sure that Daniel was protected until that next morning, didn't he? He sent the angels to shut the mouths of the lions. What does this say to you and me? Once again, in our life there's going to be lions. As we know, we're told in 1 Peter 5 and 8 that there's one that walks about, isn't there? Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is like a roaring lion that walks about and seeks who he may devour. We got a devil at our back every day of our life. There's going to be temptations. There's going to be lions in our life, temptations, things that look to take you down and take your life as a Christian. Try to guide your soul away from God. Just because we are a Christian doesn't mean we're not going to go through tough times. But if we believe, if we do what's right and righteous in this life, just like Daniel, we will see the other side. We will find the way out of no matter what temptation we go through in this life if we keep that faith. And that's what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. Know ye not that there's no temptation that has taken you that what is common to man? But with this temptation, God is going to make a way for you to escape, that you may be able to bear it. There's no sin in this life. There's no temptation in this life that is common, that isn't going to happen to you, that doesn't happen to everyone else. There's no temptation that's come along that's not common to man. God isn't choosing you out and saying, you know what, I think this guy right here needs to suffer. I'm going to make this happen to his kid. I'm going to make this happen to his family. God doesn't do that. God doesn't say, you know what, I know this guy can't stay away from the bottle, so I'm going to put a beer joint right in his way. Doesn't do that. No, God, the exact opposite. No matter what you're in, He has a way for you to get out. For every man that's thinking about going to a hotel room and cheating on his wife, there was a way in, a door into that hotel room, and there's a door out. You have a conscience. You have a way to escape that temptation. That door goes both ways. The question is, do we answer our heart as a Christian? Do we know it's wrong and escape? Or do we just go along with it willingly saying, oh, well, God will forgive me? Daniel never lost his faith. His name stands for God is my judge, and he certainly was, wasn't he? Guided him through a den of lions. And God will do the same for you and I. No matter what lion, no matter what temptation face in this life, if you turn to Him, you turn to your faith, you answer the good conscience within yourself, there's going to be a way to escape, a way to bear it. But you have to look for the exit. You have to willingly go and go out. Yes, God didn't pull Daniel out of the lion's den. He guided him through. And He does the same for you and me. And finally, number 3 here, can you think of any greater thing than Jesus Christ, who went to the cross for you and me? Could God at any moment taken off the cross? Could Christ Himself have let the nails fly out and come down at any moment? God didn't take Christ off the cross. Christ didn't take Himself off the cross. But He guided Him through, didn't He? Jesus was praying in agony, wasn't He, in Luke 22? Lord, let this cup be removed from me. He was having trouble. He was going to die. He knew he was going to die, and the man part of him was afraid. Just as you and I are afraid. And many times of our life. But God allowed him to empty that cup, didn't he? He allowed it to be removed, and he did the deed. God didn't take Christ off the cross, but he guided him through. As painful as it was to watch, God guided him through because he loves me and you. And Paul tells us about this in Romans 8 and verse 32. He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how will he not also freely give us all things? God didn't even spare his own son. He didn't take him off the cross, nor did Christ take himself off the cross, which they could have done at any moment. But they went through, and God guided him through and made sure that he could do it. Just as he makes sure that you and I can do this thing we call life. We can do it. We can get to a heavenly home. We can lead a godly life, follow the Word, and do what is necessary to get to a heavenly home. And he'll make sure we're guided through. The question is, are we going to do it? Yes, many folks in this life, whether it be those in the world or Christians, they like to doubt. They like to blame God and wonder, why does this happen to me? Sometimes in this life, folks, God needs us to go through the rough patches in our life to appreciate the good. Needs to go through the times where our faith is tried so our faith will be strong one day. But he always has a way of guiding us through. The lesson's yours. Folks, if there's anyone here this morning who has heard God's Word and has been moved to believe it, you have the chance now to come forward and let God know that you've heard His Word, that you believe it. Repent of the sins you've committed in your life. Confess you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And be baptized for the forgiveness of those sins. Or for some reason you feel like you're not as close to God, you've drifted away. There are faithful men here to pray you come back and be re-strengthened. If you have either one of those needs, won't you come as we stand and sing the song of invitation?